2:17 a.m. Space. At an altitude of 20,200 kilometers above the Earth's surface, in the medium Earth orbit band that the Global Positioning System constellation occupies, GPS Block 3 satellite SVN-78 was completing its 847th orbital pass since activation. It was transmitting positioning signals to approximately 4.2 billion receiving devices worldwide simultaneously. Military receivers managing precision-guided ordnance coordinates on 4 continents, commercial aviation systems managing 23,000 airborne flights, financial transaction networks processing settlements across 40 time zones, and power grid synchronization systems maintaining phase alignment across the eastern seaboard of North America. SVN-78 had been in service for 29 months. Its designed operational life was 15 years. At 2:17:04 a.m. SVN-78 ceased transmitting. 11 seconds later, SVN-81 ceased transmitting. The Space Delta. 2 surveillance officer at Schriever Space Force Base in Colorado, whose responsibility included the space surveillance network's tracking of objects in medium Earth orbit, registered the first anomaly at 2:17:09 a.m., 5 seconds after SVN-78's signal disappeared. The satellite's telemetry had not shown a power failure signature, a battery anomaly, or a software fault in the preceding 72 hours of monitored status. The signal had stopped as if it had stopped, which in the language of space surveillance meant one of 2 things: a catastrophic structural failure or an engagement. At 2:17:20 a.m., with SVN-81's disappearance now on his display alongside SVN-78's, the surveillance officer's assessment moved past the ambiguity. Single catastrophic structural failures happened occasionally. Simultaneous structural failures of 2 GPS Block 3 satellites in the same orbital plane, 11 seconds apart, did not happen. He transmitted the alert at 2:17:22 a.m., simultaneous to both U.S. Spacecom and to the National Command Authority watch officer, classified at the highest level available to his workstation. The alert text used 3 words that had never been used in a real-world Space Delta II alert before this morning. Confirmed hostile engagement. The Space Surveillance Network's tracking data resolved the picture over the following 4 minutes. 2 distinct radar tracks, small, fast-moving, consistent with kinetic interceptor re-entry vehicles, had been logged by the SSN's ground-based radars at Cavalier Space Force Station in North Dakota and the PAVE Pause facility at Cape Cod during the period immediately preceding the satellite disappearances. The tracks had been logged in the routine radar data stream and had not been flagged in real time because their observed velocities and altitudes had not matched the intercept trajectory parameters that the automated threat detection algorithms were configured to flag. They were in the data. They had not been processed as a threat. Post-incident analysis of the same data, conducted in the 14 minutes following the alert, confirmed what the alert had already said. The 2 tracks were consistent with SC-19 kinetic interceptor re-entry vehicles launched from the Plesetsk cosmodrome in northwestern Russia, approximately 47 minutes before the satellite engagements. The SC-19 had been launched 47 minutes before the engagements. The launches had not been detected at the time because the SC-19 in its direct ascent configuration produces a boost phase infrared signature that the space-based infrared system was designed to associate with ballistic missile launches on depressed trajectories toward terrestrial targets. A direct ascent ASAT launch aimed at medium Earth orbit produces a longer boost phase and a steeper climb angle than a ballistic missile on an intercontinental trajectory. The SBIRS processing algorithms had flagged the SC-19 launches as a probable ballistic missile event and had escalated the alert through the ICBM defense protocol, which had then been resolved as a non-threatening trajectory when the vehicle's flight paths diverged from any continental U.S. target intercept geometry. The resolution had been correct. The recategorization of the vehicles as ASAT interceptors had not occurred until 14 minutes after the satellites were gone. In those 47 minutes between launch and impact, the U.S. had possessed the information necessary to identify the ASAT engagement. The processing architecture had categorized it incorrectly. 2 GPS Block 3 satellites, each representing $523 million in procurement cost and 36 months of operational service, had been rendered non-functional by a gap between the observed event and the classification that would have triggered an intercept response. There was no intercept response available anyway. The United States did not, at the time of the engagement, have a deployed capability to intercept a kinetic ASAT vehicle in medium Earth orbit. That fact would shape every decision made in the following 90 minutes. The two engagements had been separated by 11 seconds, which the post-incident analysis identified as operationally significant. An 11-second interval between two kinetic intercepts at medium Earth orbit velocities implied a precise pre-computed firing solution that had been calculated to intercept both satellites during their aligned orbital passes. A window of optimal intercept geometry that occurred for both targets simultaneously, once per orbital period of approximately 12 hours. The SC-19's guidance system had been programmed not just to intercept a satellite, but to intercept 2 satellites during the same 90-second window, minimizing the launch signature that a wider interval engagement would have produced. A single SC-19 launch could not have achieved both intercepts. 2 vehicles had been launched, their timing calculated to arrive at their respective target positions 11 seconds apart. The precision was not incidental. It was a demonstration of the SC-19 program's operational maturity, the ability to conduct multi-target concurrent engagements in medium Earth orbit with coordinated timing. That capability had not been confirmed in any previous test. It was confirmed now, in the data that the Space Surveillance Network had retroactively assembled from its tracking records. The debris field that SVN-78's and SVN-81's destruction had created was the operational problem that superseded every other consideration within 20 minutes of the alert. Each GPS Block 3 satellite weighs approximately 3,880 kilograms. A kinetic impact at medium Earth orbit closing velocities, approximately 10 to 14 kilometers per second relative velocity, produces a fragmentation event whose debris characteristics can be estimated but not precisely calculated. The preliminary model produced by the Leo Labs Tracking Network's automated debris analysis system within 11 minutes of the alert estimated between 1,800 and 3,400 discrete trackable fragments larger than 10 centimeters from the 2 engagements, plus tens of thousands of smaller untrackable fragments. All of this debris was now in the 20,200 kilometer orbital altitude band, the GPS constellation's home altitude, shared with 29 additional operational GPS satellites, 24 Galileo satellites, 26 GLONASS satellites, and the Beidou medium orbit constellation, the Kessler syndrome threshold, the point at which orbital debris density in a given altitude band becomes self-sustaining, creating a cascade of secondary collisions that progressively renders the altitude band unusable, was not being reached by 2 satellite fragmentations. But the debris cloud from 2 3,880 kilogram objects fragmented at high relative velocity was not a localized event. It was propagating through the GPS orbital band on ballistic trajectories that the debris modeling software calculated would intersect with other satellite positions within the GPS and Galileo constellations within time frames ranging from 4 hours to several weeks, depending on the specific fragment and the specific satellite. The immediate operational question was not whether the debris was dangerous. It was which satellites were in the debris cloud's near-term intersection trajectories and whether they could be maneuvered out of those trajectories before impact. The commercial implications of the GPS degradation were becoming visible in the economic monitoring systems that the NSC's economic advisor had begun tracking at 2:48 a.m. Aviation systems dependent on GPS-augmented navigation were receiving automated alerts from the FAA's air traffic control system, advising of reduced positioning accuracy in the affected coverage corridors. 3 major hub airports in the degraded coverage zone had already shifted to backup ILS approaches for arriving aircraft. A technically sound response that would not disrupt operations significantly. But that was visible to the 4,300 commercial flights currently airborne in North American airspace whose flight management computers had registered the GPS accuracy alert. Financial markets were 4 hours from opening in New York. The GPS timing signals that the NASDAQ and NYSE used for transaction sequencing were provided by the full constellation, not by any single satellite, and the current 91% coverage was sufficient to maintain timing accuracy within operating parameters. The 14 to 21-day degradation period would not affect financial infrastructure at current constellation status. If further satellites were lost, that assessment would change. The Economic Monitoring Team transmitted their preliminary market impact assessment to the NSC at 3:04 a.m. Manageable at current degradation level, significant if constellation fell below 80%. GPS Block 3 satellites carry a limited propulsion capability for orbital station keeping. Their Delta-V budget, the total velocity change available from their propulsion systems, was not designed for evasive maneuvering against a high-density debris field. Each maneuver consumed fuel that the satellite could not replace, and that reduced its remaining operational lifespan. But a satellite without propulsion fuel at the end of its operational life was a manageable outcome. A satellite fragmented by a debris impact in the GPS orbital band was an additional debris source that worsened the cascade problem. The Air Force Space Command's Satellite Operations Center at Schriever began maneuver calculations for the 29 remaining operational GPS Block 3 satellites at 2:31 a.m., 14 minutes after the alert. The calculation identified 7 satellites with debris intersection trajectories occurring within the next 6 hours based on the preliminary debris model. Of those 7, 4 had sufficient propulsion reserve for a maneuver of the required magnitude. 3 did not. By 2:41 a.m., 24 minutes after the alert, the National Security Council had assembled on a secure conference bridge. U.S. Space Command had transmitted its preliminary assessment. 2 GPS Block 3 satellites confirmed non-functional probable kinetic ASAT engagement by Russian SC-19 interceptors debris field in GPS orbital band, 7 additional satellites with near-term intersection trajectories, 3 without maneuver capability. The aggregate GPS constellation degradation from the 2 lost satellites was approximately 8% of total positioning coverage, with specific geographic gaps developing over portions of Central Asia and the Arctic approach corridors over the next 4 hours as the orbital geometry evolved without the 2 lost satellites. Military GPS accuracy in the affected coverage gaps was degrading from the standard 3-meter circular error probable to between 18 and 34 meters depending on the specific position and time. The NSC's first question was not how to respond to Russia. It was how to stabilize the constellation. The Air Force Space Command duty commander transmitted the maneuver authorization for the 4 satellites with propulsion reserve at 2:44 a.m. The maneuvers were calculated to place each satellite outside the debris field's projected highest density corridors over the following 6 hours, accepting a temporary degradation in GPS coverage geometry in exchange for the satellite's physical survival. The maneuvers began executing at 2:51 a.m. Each maneuver took between 4 and 9 minutes of thruster firing to achieve the required velocity change. The 3 satellites without adequate propulsion reserve were a different problem. 2 were assessed as having sufficient fuel for a partial maneuver that would reduce their debris intersection probability from approximately 67% to approximately 31%. Not safe, but meaningfully better. The 3rd had essentially no remaining propulsion capability and was on a trajectory that placed it in the highest density corridor of the debris field at approximately 4:20 a.m. The satellite's operators had 99 minutes at the time of the assessment to determine whether anything could be done. The answer was that nothing kinetically protective could be done. The satellite would transit the debris field at 4:20 a.m. on whatever trajectory the laws of orbital mechanics placed it on. The operator's only available action was to ensure it was in the highest power, lowest target cross-section orientation that its attitude control system could achieve, minimizing the probability that a fragment impact would produce a catastrophic fragmentation rather than a damaging but non-fragmenting strike. It was the orbital equivalent of turning sideways to reduce exposure. It was not a solution. It was a partial mitigation of a bad outcome. The Allied consultation that ran simultaneously with the NSC's internal deliberations produced a dimension of the response that the US could not have generated unilaterally. The European Space Agency, which operated the 24-satellite Galileo constellation in the same orbital band, had registered the GPS degradation event and transmitted a formal inquiry to USS PACECOM at 2:29 a.m. ESA's Constellation Operations Center in Darmstadt, Germany had the same debris trajectory models and the same concern about its own satellite's intersection risks. Galileo and GPS shared the same orbital altitude band. The debris from the two Russian intercepts did not distinguish between American and European satellites. The ESA inquiry was not a diplomatic protest. It was a technical request for debris trajectory data that would allow ESA to make the same maneuver decisions for its constellation that US Spacecom was making for GPS. The data was transmitted to ESA at 2:36 a.m. 4 Galileo satellites received maneuver authorizations from ESA operations at 2:52 a.m. based on the shared debris model. The coordination between US Spacecom and ESA in the 19 minutes between ESA's inquiry and its maneuver authorizations was the fastest multinational space operations coordination on record. The shared threat had produced shared action faster than any joint exercise had previously achieved. The NSC's second question, what to do about Russia, was being processed on a parallel track that intersected with the debris stabilization track at every decision point. Because the response options were constrained by the same orbital mechanics that governed the debris problem. A kinetic response against Russian space assets would create additional debris in relevant orbital bands, worsening the cascade problem that the Russian attack had initiated. This was not an accidental constraint. It was a structural feature of the strategic environment that the Russian operational planners had specifically incorporated into their targeting logic. By engaging US satellites, Russia had created a situation in which the most symmetrical available response, kinetic engagement of Russian satellites, would harm the global space environment in ways that would damage US interests alongside Russian ones. The NSC's legal counsel identified this constraint explicitly at 3:02 a.m. A kinetic response against Russian satellites would be legally defensible as collective self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. It would also be operationally self-defeating in the current debris environment. The constraint was not legal. It was physical. The non-kinetic response options were processed in 3 categories. First, ground-based options. The US could transmit jamming signals on Russian military satellite communication frequencies, activate cyber operations against the Plesetsk cosmodrome's ground control systems, and impose immediate sanctions on every entity associated with the SC-19 program. Second, diplomatic options. Emergency UN Security Council session, bilateral communication to Moscow through the established Space Security Hotline, and formal treaty invocation under the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which prohibited interference with another state's space operations. Third, capability response options. acceleration of the next-generation GPS ground control system upgrade that would enable faster constellation reconfiguration, expedited launch of GPS Block 3 replacement satellites from the existing production contract, and activation of the alternative positioning systems, ELRAN and other terrestrial backup networks that existed precisely for this degradation scenario. At 3:09 a.m., the U.S. transmitted a message to Moscow through the space security hotline that had been established in 2023 following a bilateral agreement on space operations transparency. The message stated that the United States had confirmed a Russian kinetic ASAT engagement against 2 U.S. GPS satellites and demanded an immediate explanation, an immediate halt to any further ASAT operations, and Russian cooperation in debris mitigation. The message also stated that the United States reserved all rights under international law to respond to this engagement, and that the manner and timing of that response would be determined by the U.S. government. Moscow's response arrived at 3:17 a.m., 8 minutes after the U.S. transmission. It was brief. The Russian government stated that it had conducted a scheduled technical test of its direct ascent space vehicle system and that the test had proceeded as planned. The statement did not acknowledge that the test had involved the engagement of U.S. satellites. It did not acknowledge the debris field. It expressed no concern for the 29 remaining GPS satellites, whose trajectories were now complicated by a debris field that the Russian test had created. The phrase "scheduled technical test" was the diplomatic wrapper around a message that required no translation. Russia had engaged 2 U.S. GPS satellites and was describing the engagement as routine. The message it was sending was not about the 2 satellites. It was about what the SC-19 could do, that the U.S. had no deployed counter capability in medium Earth orbit, and that the GPS constellation, the infrastructure backbone of U.S. military precision operations globally, could be reduced at Russia's discretion. The third GPS satellite, SVN-74, entered the high-density debris corridor at 4:19 a.m., 1 minute ahead of the model's prediction. Its attitude control system had been configured for minimum cross-section presentation at 3:44 a.m. The satellite transited the debris corridor over 8 minutes and 17 seconds. Post-transit telemetry showed 2 minor impacts, confirmed by acoustic sensors in the satellite's structural monitoring system, neither of which produced fragmentation. The satellite remained operational. The partial mitigation had worked. The worst predicted outcome had not materialized. At 4:31 a.m., 2 hours and 14 minutes after the initial engagement, U.S. Spacecom transmitted its updated assessment to the NSC, GPS constellation status. 2 satellites non-functional, confirmed non-recoverable. 4 satellites maneuvered to safe trajectories, temporarily degraded coverage geometry. 3 satellites transited debris field, all surviving, 1 with minor structural impacts, all operational. Debris field status propagating through GPS orbital band, projected to produce additional satellite intersection events over the following 72 hours. Constellation coverage, approximately 91% of nominal globally, with specific degradation in Arctic and Central Asian corridors expected to persist for 14 to 21 days, pending constellation geometry adjustment. Military GPS accuracy, nominal in most regions, degraded in 3% of globally distributed operational positions. Replacement satellite launch. Earliest possible activation 14 months under accelerated schedule. Time from first satellite loss to SBIRS alert, 18 seconds. Time from alert to confirmed ASAT classification, 14 minutes. Time from alert to NSC assembled, 24 minutes. Time from alert to maneuver authorizations, 27 minutes. GPS constellation coverage at 4:31 a.m., 91% of nominal. Satellites confirmed non-functional, 2. Satellites surviving debris transit, 3. Russian diplomatic response technically non-responsive. U.S. kinetic response capability against the SC-19 at medium Earth orbit, not deployed. U.S. response options available, non-kinetic only. The SC-19 program's 2 test vehicles had cost an estimated $340 million. The 2 GPS Block 3 satellites they had engaged represented $1.046 billion in procurement cost and irreplaceable orbital positioning geometry. The 90-minute window from alert to debris field stabilization had been the window in which the available response options had been constrained by a physical reality that no political decision could alter. Kinetic responses created debris. Debris threatened the constellation, and the constellation was the thing being protected. The Russian operation had not simply engaged 2 satellites. It had demonstrated that the GPS architecture's vulnerability was not its electronics or its power systems or its ground control. It was its orbital exposure in a physical environment where the tools of conventional deterrence produced the outcome they were trying to prevent. The response to that demonstration was being built in 14-month launch schedules, next-generation ground control architectures, and ELORAN activation programs. It was being built at a pace that the SC-19's demonstrated capability did not match.